Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
All right. Today, we're going to be looking at post-World War II perspectives.
Okay.
Specifically, we're going to be focusing on General George Patton
Interesting.
and some of his reflections on the war's aftermath.
Okay.
And we've got some excerpts from a text that explores this. And, I got to say, reading this, it's not your typical history book stuff.
Really?
This is like raw, unfiltered
Wow.
thoughts. It's kind of like getting a glimpse behind the curtain,
That's fascinating. What kind of stuff are we talking about here?
Well, it's really interesting because you see how Patton's own personal views really kind of clash with the official narrative at the time.
Right.
And it reveals this sense of disillusionment that I think went way deeper than a lot of people realize.
It's interesting how these iconic figures often have such complex personal journeys, especially after such a monumental event like World War II.
Yeah, and he wasn't just some disgruntled general.
Yeah, right.
His concerns really cut to the core of how the war's end was handled.
Right.
And the political landscape that was starting to emerge,
I see. Yeah,
For example, he was really critical of the Allied approach to Germany after the war.
Oh, okay. So in what way, what was he disagreeing with?
Well, he felt like they were missing this crucial opportunity to really build a stable and prosperous Europe.
Okay.
And he actually said, there's this famous quote that really sums it up. He said, if what we are doing to the Germans is liberty, then give me death.
Wow, that's a powerful statement.
Right.
It really shows how strongly he felt about this.
Yeah, and what specifically bothered him so much about these policies?
Well, Patton believed that this harsh treatment of Germany would only breed resentment and instability, and ultimately he was worried that it would push them towards the very ideology they were trying to defeat. Communism.
Yeah, it's almost like he was seeing the seeds of the Cold War being sown right there in the rubble of World War II.
Exactly. And his fears about communism were further fueled by some of the disturbing reports that were coming out of Berlin at the time.
Which was under Soviet occupation.
That's right. That's right.
At that point.
Yeah.
And he talked about witnessing, or at least hearing, about some pretty horrific things.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about, political ideology or anything like that.
Right.
This was about basic human rights.
Absolutely.
What were some of the things he was talking about?
Well, Patton claimed that Soviet forces were actually shooting women and children who were trying to flee the city.
It's hard to even imagine.
I know. And there were reports of widespread violence, including, rape being committed against civilians.
That's just awful.
It is. And these accounts, if they're true, really paint a very horrifying picture of the Soviet occupation.
And you have to wonder, did these experiences, do you think, contribute to his belief that he could have and maybe even should have taken Berlin before the Soviets did?
It's certainly possible. He was adamant that if he had been given the authority, he could have captured Berlin first.
Right.
And, it's a tantalizing what if.
Right. Could it have changed everything?
Exactly. Could a different outcome in Berlin have actually prevented the Cold War or at least altered its course?
Yeah.
It's a question that we can't really answer.
It's impossible to know for sure.
But it's definitely something to think about.
But here's what I find really interesting.
Okay.
Despite all of these strong objections he had.
Yeah.
Patton still tried to implement Washington's policies.
That's interesting, yeah.
Why would he do that?
Well, I think that's where his sense of duty comes in.
Okay.
Despite his own personal reservations.
Yeah.
He was a soldier, first and foremost. And I think he struggled with reconciling his own beliefs with the orders that he was given.
It's going to be a tough position to be in.
Exactly. And his attempts to sort of moderate the impact of those policies actually led to clashes with Eisenhower and other generals, which shows just how deeply he felt about these issues.
Yeah, it speaks to the complexity of his character,
Absolutely.
This internal struggle between his convictions and his duty.
Yeah.
And speaking of powerful figures who were shaping this era, we can't really overlook John Foster Dulles.
Of course.
Right? The U.S. Secretary of State at the time. He's kind of a key figure in understanding, I think, the Cold War's early years.
Absolutely.
And he played this pivotal role in shaping U.S. foreign policy.
Right.
Particularly this strategy of containment.
Yes.
Which was aimed at preventing the spread of communism.
Exactly.
Just to be clear for our listeners.
Sure.
Containment meant basically trying to box in the Soviet Union's influence. Right. And not just militarily, but economically and ideologically as well.
That's right. Yeah, it was a multifaceted approach that really influenced everything.
Yeah.
From military alliances like NATO to economic aid programs like the Marshall Plan.
Wow.
It really defined the global chessboard for decades.
Okay, so back to Dulles, though.
Yeah.
You know, he wasn't exactly a shrinking violet when it came to wielding power.
No, not at all.
There are accounts that he basically ran the show.
Right.
Like, even to the point of dictating speeches for President Eisenhower.
That's right. Dulles actually confided that Eisenhower had essentially given him free rein on foreign policy.
So he had a lot of power.
Yeah, and this suggests the influence that military and industrial interests had on shaping Cold War policies, often kind of behind the scenes.
Okay, so there's a lot going on behind the scenes. It seems like a lot of hidden currents shaping the post-war world.
Exactly.
And speaking of things being left out, you mentioned something really curious about how major historical accounts, like the ones written by Eisenhower and Churchill and de Gaulle, leave out this crucial detail about the Nazi regime.
It's a puzzling omission.
Yeah. What is it?
Despite their detailed accounts of the war, these prominent figures completely fail to mention the Nazi gas chambers.
Wow.
And the systematic extermination of Jews and other minorities.
That's a huge part of the story.
It is. It is.
Why would they leave that out?
It's a question that historians are still debating.
Yeah.
You know, some argue that it was simply a matter of focus, that these leaders were primarily concerned with military and political aspects of the war.
I see.
Others suggest it reflects a deeper societal discomfort with confronting the full horror of the Holocaust at that time.
Yeah, it's really hard to say, but it's certainly interesting.
It is.
So we've gone from Patton's disillusionment to the dark realities of the Soviet occupation, from the influence of figures like Dulles, to the omissions in these prominent historical accounts.
It's fascinating how all these pieces fit together to give us a much more, well, I think, nuanced and unsettling picture of the post-war world
than we typically get.
Exactly.
And it really leaves us with a lot to think about.
It does. It does.
How might things have been different if Patton's views had more sway?
Right.
What can we learn from the narratives that were presented by figures like Eisenhower and Churchill?
It's a good reminder that history is never simple.
No.
There are always multiple perspectives, hidden agendas, and untold stories waiting to be uncovered.
So what stands out to you from all of this?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway for me is how crucial it is to seek out those multiple perspectives, to really understand the complexities of history.
And to question the narratives that were given, you know.
Exactly.
Think critically.
Yeah.
Keep asking questions. And never stop exploring these pivotal periods in history.
Couldn't agree more.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
See you then.